So Claire and I wrote a blog post here, and it basically covers the key questions that we get across the macronutrients. And so we're going to dive into those quickly and summarize a quick answer for each of these key questions.
Yeah.
So to start, should we just dig right into it?
Yeah.
The first question we have here is, how much protein do I need? And I mean, yeah, this is kind of, I could answer this in a few different ways, but how would you explain that to somebody, just in a general way?
I think it's super hard to say. When people post online, they're like, how much protein do I need? It's like, every person is individual. It's like saying, what exercise program should I do? It's so individual. Depends on your age, depends on your activity level, depends on what your goals are, depends on your health status. So I think there are general guidelines that both you and I kind of agree on, like between 1 and 2 grams per kilogram of body weight.
Yeah.
But I would say ideally between 1.2 and 1.6.
Yeah. I would just say, just to put like a general answer out there, I would say an absolute minimum of 1 gram per kilogram of body weight, just so that you can, we'll dig into this a bit later on, but so that you can basically keep yourself functioning properly in terms of hormones.
Yeah, yeah. So the second question we have is, even if I'm not looking to build massive amounts of muscle, why should I be eating protein?
So as I just said, essentially, like, our hormones are created from proteins.
Yeah.
So it's integral that we eat protein in order to maintain a healthy hormone balance. And as we know, hormones regulate essentially everything, which everything which happens within our body. So.
Yeah. And not only hormones, but the DNA and ligaments and hair and skin. So people who are like older complaining about their saggy skin, like one solution there is, in your youth, eat more protein, the right kinds of protein to build good skin, because it's all protein is part of our building blocks. Yeah.
So then next, do I have to have animal protein? So I mean, again, I could answer that a few different ways. In my opinion, I think animal protein gives you the most bang for its buck. But no, you don't need to have it. There's many other protein options. You just need to eat slightly more of those to get the same effect.
Yeah, and you get with that a little bit extra stuff usually. So if it's in the form of beans, you're getting protein, but then you're also getting a lot of carbs, and that means that to get the same amount of protein that you would from a chicken breast in beans, you'd have to eat a lot of beans. And,
like we said earlier, I think we spoke in quinoa, for instance. It's somewhere around 3 cups of quinoa provides the same protein content as 1 chicken breast. So that's significantly different in terms of carbohydrates and calories. So something to consider. And
I think the most important point also is then making sure you get a balance of the amino acids that you need, because your body can't manufacture some of them, your body can manufacture others, but your needs for the non-essential ones they're all supplied by animal protein. So that's part of why animal protein becomes a more bang for your buck in that way. So then the next question we have is there a best time of day to take protein?
Honestly, my opinion is no. I think that definitely after a workout, it's important to have some protein intake. But generally, I wouldn't say there's any significant difference whether you eat more protein in the morning or the afternoon. Just generally make sure you have protein post-workout.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to keep in mind is that we can only absorb so much protein in one sitting before it becomes expensive pee, or it turns into glucose if you're on a more carb-restricted diet. So people sometimes do keto, and then they do keto wrong and they kick themselves out of ketosis because they're eating bucket loads of protein, because your body's then converting that extra protein into glucose. So, aiming for 25, I think, to 35 grams per serving is
seems about right. Yeah.
Seems about what we can absorb.
Again, it depends on how big the person is.
Yeah.
Seems roughly right.
Yeah. So then we've got what forms of protein are the best?
forms of protein are the best? I mean, difficult. I mean, in terms of the array of amino acids, steak, red meats are a great option. Salmon also. I would say then like poultry is kind of suboptimal, slightly less in terms of its amino acid ratio in comparison to beef, and so I mean my two choices would be there, like oily fish and beef.
Yeah. I think
Oh,
taking
eggs, of
into
course, sorry.
eggs. I think we thought eggs go without saying. No?
Yeah, sure.
But I think the other thing that people don't realize is the bioavailability of protein sources. So like meat or something like whey protein is highly absorbable. So when you eat it, you can absorb a lot of it and it's digestible. Whereas something like, I don't know, a plant-based protein, some pea proteins, that kind of thing, you can only absorb and then digest, so at the end you're getting a fraction of what the actual protein is that you consume to start with.
I think pea proteins are actually the extreme. I think it's one of the lowest availability is in like pea protein, so slightly better with things like hemp, is better availability, but sure, like eggs for instance are like pretty much fully bioavailable, as is like you said, whey, and I mean near enough also the same with beef.
And what about dairy?
Generally, or for protein? For protein, I think it's a great source. I mean, as we've experienced as coaches, people have a hard time eating meat, just meat. So while obviously it's the best option, it's not the only option, and I mean, in terms of adding variety, dairy is a great option. It's suboptimal again in terms of the protein in the dairy, but I mean, another great option for sure, and something that should be utilized if you can tolerate lactose.
If you don't want beef in the morning for breakfast, or if you get sick of paying a lot for high quality meat, it's easier to get high quality dairy at an affordable price. And last question about protein. Where do I get my protein if I'm a vegan or vegetarian? Which we've already kind of touched on. But,
vegan or vegetarian. So powders for sure is going to be something that you should utilize.
I think for vegans that's a non-negotiable. Otherwise you're going to have to eat so much beans that your stomach explodes and
exactly. And I mean, you have kichererbs and chickpeas. These are great. Well, I wouldn't say great option, but a good option for vegans. Besides this, I mean, vegetarian is slightly easier. I mean, we can include, especially pescatarian. I mean, you can include fish and eggs. That already is like really, these are two great sources right there. But I mean, hemp protein powders, I guess, is like going to be one of your best options, like the gold standard, you might say, for a vegan. What do you think?
I think the same, and I think the consciousness is really what's needed for vegans and vegetarians. Is we who eat meat and dairy and eggs and fish and everything, it's not hard for us to get our protein in. But for vegans especially, and vegetarians in some cases, it just takes that extra step of consciousness to be like, okay, I'm sitting down for a meal, do I have enough protein?
For sure.
Especially to keep you full. I mean, protein is the most satiating macronutrient, so just for a factor of being full, especially on a weight loss protocol, that's important. All right, so now if we move on to fats.
So what are the different kinds of fats? I mean, we're going to go into that quite a lot of detail in the blog.
In the blog post you can read more about it.
I mean, the way I like to look at it is more saturated, unsaturated, and obviously having a focus on omega-3s and 6s. Omega-3 and 6 are important because we need to strike a ratio. Omega-6, as you'll read, is inflammatory. Omega-3 is anti-inflammatory. Omega-6 is far easier to attain. Omega-3 is actually rather difficult.
Especially if you're vegan or vegetarian.
Easy to supplement, though, I will say. Like krill oil is a great option for this, and I mean, I'm already jumping into different questions, I think. But I mean, really, in terms of where you should focus, I think just focusing on getting a good amount of omega-3s is covering pretty much all your bases already when it comes to how you should optimize your fat intake. Besides that, there is everything else kind of follows behind that.
I think an easy way to get enough fat in a healthy portion without having to think too much about it is eating real food. So like fatty sources of fish, avocado, nuts, seeds, cheese with full fat dairy, and then you don't have to think too much about how much tablespoons of coconut oil you're eating or whatever. So the second question is, doesn't fat make you fat?
Makes sense, no?
Goes directly into your arteries and causes heart disease.
No, that's not really how it works. But unfortunately, this is what we've been told, and like there was quite a story construed. But fat doesn't work that way, and actually, fat like consumed in high amounts actually increases the body's ability to be able to metabolize fat. So it's only going to give you a positive effect in terms of how much fat you have in your body. Like we've proven that like calories don't count alone, in the sense that someone eating the exact same calorie content with a purely fat-based diet, and then someone else eating like a carbohydrate-rich diet with the same amount of calories, that carb diet, the person eating that carb diet, will have the worse body composition
and worse health outcomes.
And the worst health, sure. But I mean, we're looking purely now in terms of like, does it make you fat? And no, it's been proven to have the opposite effect, actually.
And your body doesn't just use fat it can use fat for energy. It's a great source of energy, and it's more clean burning than something like carbs. But it's like your cell membranes are made out of fats, and the way your cells communicate is a huge part of how your body functions. So if your cell membranes aren't built properly, then
and this comes back to this like skin, right? Something people always notice, like when they eat a high-fat diet, is having better skin. I mean, it makes sense. Like if your cells are healthier, they've got exactly what they need. You've got the fat, like every fat that your body needs to synthesize these cells. And of course, you're going to have then like great-looking skin because they're made out of all the correct building blocks. So there's something that I think that's really important to pay attention to, because it's something that's easy to notice, I think. With fat, like when the fat content goes up, the skin typically tends to get better.
The right fats. So then that leads us into the next question, which is, what kind of fat should I eat? So what's the right fat? What's the wrong fat? There's a big difference.
So I mean, again, omega-3, like focusing on like incorporating omega-3 is like the main thing that I would focus on for anybody looking to get like a good balance of their fats. Saturated fats I wouldn't pay too much attention to. They're very easy for us to metabolize, as you'll read, very short chain, and super easy for us to ascertain energy from. Staying
away from stuff like corn oil and basically any industrial processed oil, peanut oil, safflower oil, all of those oils are highly inflammatory. The processes that they go through to make oil out of peanuts and oil out of safflowers and corn is like, already the process uses highly toxic chemicals and is super bad for your body. So stay away from those at all costs.
I mean, again, it just comes down to a bit of common sense. I mean, if something is food, if something can be found like in its natural form as a fat, then typically it's a good fat. You know? Like as you said, like these are coming from essentially flowers and being like processed so hard that they actually then become so-called edible fats. Which they are, and which is why they're inflammatory.
So how much fat should I eat?
Well, typically I would say 50%, between 40 and 60%, you could say, as like to give a rough guideline of your total calorie intake.
I think it depends also on, I think, very culturally widely varies throughout the world, and some cultures naturally eat lower fat and some cultures naturally eat higher fat, but they're all eating good quality sources of fat. So making sure to include fat in every one of your meals is super important.
For sure. I mean, it's just a guideline. I think in terms of, as I mentioned already, for anyone looking to lose body fat and like change their body composition, having more fat is always going to benefit you, in my opinion. Obviously, like not to the extreme, but up to about 60%. You can be mindful, exactly. Up to about 60%.
And the last question about fat that a lot of people are concerned with, and is still a pretty pervasive myth, is that saturated fat causes heart disease. And cholesterol, which is also then lumped in with saturated fat, will give you a heart attack immediately if you eat it. Right, so yeah, saturated fat is not the enemy when it comes to the heart disease, and actually saturated fat has been proved in studies, very controlled, randomized clinical studies, that groups that eat high saturated fat and groups that eat low saturated fat, it makes no difference in the occurrence of heart disease. Cholesterol is similar in that your cells make the cholesterol that they need to sustain themselves, because again, it's for cell membrane health, that's how they function. So your cells can make all the cholesterol they need, and most of what you eat actually in terms of cholesterol just gets excreted by the body, not absorbed.
You can't really tamper with the amount of cholesterol that you actually have in your body. It doesn't come from the diet itself.
Yeah. And so leading into that, one of the very necessary but not sufficient components of heart disease is inflammation. And what's one of the leading causes of inflammation is high carb intake. So actually high carb diets, which also increase your production of triglycerides, which also then are a major factor in developing heart disease, are much elevated when you eat a high carb diet. So
sure. And also, as we mentioned already, like the bad fats, you might say, also contribute heavily to this.
Definitely. So then we're going to move on to carbs. One of the first complaints that we get, especially from people who are exercising, is, oh my God, don't I need carbs to survive?
Yeah, I mean, it feels that way, especially when you first stop eating carbohydrates, for sure. But I mean, not true. I mean, I think we already mentioned this in the initial pamphlet that we gave out, that there's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. What that means is we don't need anything from carbohydrates in terms of our body's function.
Yeah.
I mean, the brain uses glucose, sure, but we can synthesize that glucose within our body from fat cells. That's what adipose tissue is. It becomes we create energy from the adipose tissue in the form of glucose. Yeah, what else? I mean, of course, we can get carbohydrates also from protein, as you also mentioned already.
Yeah.
So no, like ultimately, we don't need carbohydrates from our diet.
Yeah, and only about, I mean, the glucose needed from the brain it's about 15 to 30% of the overall energy intake of the brain. So even by eating 50 grams of carbs a day, you're already pretty much meeting that need. And again, like we said, if you
which is difficult not to eat, really, in a sense, as well. I mean,
if you're eating vegetables, you should be eating those in significant enough quantities that you can reach that quite easily.
Yep.
So then the second question is, what are the different kinds of carbs?
So, just in terms of how they affect your body, I like to categorize them into essentially like slow.
Yeah.
So where there's like many more bonds, much harder for us to digest, and takes a lot longer to metabolize. And then something like a sugar, which is on the other end of the spectrum, where essentially it can be metabolized immediately. It's straight.
Immediately goes into the bloodstream.
Immediately goes into the bloodstream. We then have to overutilize our insulin to regulate the bloodstream, and this is where we get the insulin resistance in our cells and problems in the future.
Yeah. So like we said, like vegetables are also carbs. So those are just super long chain carbs that also have a cell wall structure that's intact, which means that a large portion of that carb is also not digested by us, but digested by our microbiota in our guts. So that's also a factor that's overlooked when carbs are all lumped in one category. Is carbs are not carbs.
Yeah, no, for sure, definitely not.
And also taking into account the rate at which the blood sugar spikes, like the glycemic index is a good indicator of that, because vegetables will have a low glycemic index, meaning that they'll raise your blood sugar slowly, whereas something like an energy drink or a candy bar will spike your blood sugar right away.
Or a smoothie.
Right.
I have to drop that in there.
So don't I need to have carbs for energy for a workout? And a lot of people ask us this, and like, oh, don't those pro athletes, they eat bowls of pasta before they perform? Doesn't that mean that I need to be eating bowls of pasta so I can perform?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I mean, ultimately we're using our glycogen stores when we work out.
Yeah.
So it's not really anything that we've like eaten in the last couple of hours. I mean, yeah, you might use some carbohydrates from that as it's being metabolized, but most of what we use in our workouts, even in like more explosive movements, is the glycogen stores that are already in the muscle.
Yeah.
And the body again can synthesize and refill these glycogen stores through excess protein and through the adipose tissue.
Yeah.
So.
And your body can only store so much carbs. So if you're sitting down for a meal, our glycogen stores in our liver and in our muscles are anywhere between 100 plus maybe 400 grams. So our stores are never empty. Maybe at best they're half empty from a really hard workout. And
Yep.
if you're sitting down the night before a big race or something and pounding a bowl of pasta or whatever, like, you're only refilling a small portion, and then the rest of that is going directly into your fat tissue.
Yeah.
And then you're also not training your body to be able to use, when you're not doing explosive movements, use your fatty acids for energy rather than glycogen, because you don't always need to be using
Yeah.
glycogen for energy.
Ultimately, we're built to work differently.
Right.
I mean, like, there was no bowls of pasta, you know, before.
In our caveman days.
Exactly. So, I mean, you have to think of it that way. Like, it just makes sense that we're able to operate without that.
Yeah, yeah. So, second to last question is, aren't complex carbs healthy and heart protective, and shouldn't we be filling our plates with carbs to avoid heart disease? And we've kind of already covered a little bit of this.
Yeah, and actually, I've never even heard that theory. But
But very pervasive in the States.
yeah, it's strange. But yeah, no, I don't know really how to answer that. I would just say simply no. I mean, we've kind of covered this. You keep the heart healthy by having a good array of fatty acids. Like, eat your oily fish,
Yeah.
you know, eat your olive oil and your olives.
Yeah.
Just get the good fats in,
Yeah.
and you know, lower the sugar. There's nothing wrong with complex carbohydrates.
Right.
Like, I mean, if you eat sweet potatoes, for instance,
Yeah.
like it's like a great option for someone that wants to still have carbohydrates in their diet, but doesn't want to eat sugar, for instance.
Yeah.
And it will give you some energy, and like, there's nothing wrong with it, but I just don't think it has like, it's not a necessity.
Right, right. And I think that also, like we talked about with the protein discussion, eating boatloads of quinoa will eventually, it'll raise your blood sugar, and it'll cause more inflammation than if you were getting your energy from fat.
Yeah.
And that inflammation is really ultimately the underlying factor in not only heart disease, but diabetes and cancer and autoimmune disease. So it's, maybe limit the carbs if you're going to choose a fat or a carb.
Yep, agreed. I mean, also you've got like digestive complications and stuff when you have like quinoa is a good example.
The
of, like,
lectins and
yeah, sure. And this is a whole other topic, but yeah.
another rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah.
Okay, last questions. What about cheat days or having treats in moderation?
Yeah, I mean, this is super dependent on the person, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, some people are able to really sort of compartmentalize their cheat day or cheat meal, I would say, is better, because like, you can do a lot of damage in a day.
Yep.
But with ultimately what I advise, and like something which has worked for me then, is finding something which isn't like, which you can treat as a treat, but isn't necessarily going to derail you. You know, so it's not like a massive pizza or something. It's like, it's more something closer to the parameters of your diet, if that makes sense. But maybe just pushing it a little bit.
Like the keto cakes that taste super good and are really, I mean, they're calorically dense but also nutrient dense and taste like a treat.
Exactly. I mean, some people even have things like, I mean, maybe they try not to eat like bacon or something for certain reasons, or like, for me, maybe like quark with like loads of fruit in there, because that is kind of sugary, you know. It's like quark and with a load of sugar with it, kind of thing. But ultimately, it's high nutrition as well. So it's like, I'm not just having like
pounding down
some sugar for no reason, in a sense.
I think the other thing is, like, you probably work with people too. I've seen people, I know myself, I am one person that I'm better off saying I don't want any of it. I can't if I start, I won't be able to stop. I don't want 2 bites of cake because then I'll want cake for the rest of the week.
Yeah.
But there's also many people who do much better if you tell them you'll never be able to have cake again, they might die. But if you say, once a week you can have a small piece of cake, and then they feel satisfied and happy. So I think it's also really a big part of finding out who you are in that spectrum.
For sure.
And
Yeah.
what your limits are.
But what I would say is definitely not like cheat day. I think is something that I would never advise for, because there's just too much time there.
Yeah.
And it's like it's enough time to really derail you for a while.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on where you are actually in your journey as well. I mean, if you're at a point when you're really trying to like lose body fat, or like if you're trying to lose significant amounts of weight, then it's better to stay on track.
Yeah.
You know, and like deviate slightly, have like a cheap meal, like just have something which you enjoy, get back on track.
Yeah.
If you're taking an entire day where you have like 3 or 4 meals, all of which are like taking you in the opposite direction, it's going to like damage your goals too much, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And it's going to make it difficult the coming days as well, because all the same reward pathways have been triggered again. Your cravings are going to be peaking for the following days, so you're just making it harder on yourself.
Yeah.
I find.
All right. Thanks for listening, and
Thank you.
we'll be back with another video soon. Bye.
Bye.